What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Wealth Wednesdays. It's a small group today. I got my boy RJ with me, and we're going to talk about debt. We're going to talk about inflation. We're going to talk about what I think is one of the most talked about topics recently, and that is what is happening to the value of a dollar. And if you don't understand how debt works and how inflation works, then it's probably going to hurt you. And so the purpose of this quick video today is I want to help people understand how inflation, if it happens, if you believe inflation is happening, which it's hard to ignore it at this point, how can you then get ahead? How can you leverage inflation? Because everything that you do with your money is either going to help or hurt your ability to become wealthy. Okay. Inflation is making your dollars worth much less as time goes on. So how can we fix it? And if you watch the post on my social media, I was talking today about how the problem isn't the 7.5% interest rates for a mortgage. The problem is not understanding how wealth actually works. Okay. So let's start off with, and RJ, if you have any questions, dude, feel free to just interrupt me if that's cool.
Yeah.
Let's look at, RJ knows this already too. He saw it. Let's look at the example, person A and person B, okay? Person A owns a $200,000 house. This person paid cash. Person B owns a $200,000 house. This person has a mortgage for all of the $200,000. And then they have money inside the bank of $200,000. Who has the higher net worth? It's a tough question, isn't it? This person has no debt. This person has a bunch of debt, but a bunch of cash. There's a reason I wrote the book, Don't Be Debt-Free and Broke. This person has very little access to cash. Here's a little secret too. The equity in your home is not yours. And if you want proof, take it out. RJ just got a HELOC. RJ, you had to fill out an application, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
You had to prove income. They do a credit check. They had to approve that your ability to pay off the loan.
Yeah.
You had to jump through some hoops. And then what happens when they gave you the check? Do they want it back?
Well, yeah, I mean, right away. Yeah.
Every month they want to get repaid. The equity is not in your home. You could go to a third party and borrow money against your house in the form of a mortgage or a home equity line of credit. It's not your equity. The only way to get the equity out of your house is to sell the house. That's it. It's the only way to get the money out of your house. Now, am I a believer of like getting equity working for me? Yeah, because I call it debt equity. This person A, has debt equity inside the house. They paid cash, so they're proud. They're broke also. They're debt-free and broke. Now, they probably have money elsewhere. But what happens with inflation? Inflation says that the value of my dollars today are more valuable than they will be tomorrow. So this person used the most valuable dollars to buy an asset whose value has nothing to do with whether or not there's debt associated with it. So for example, both houses are exactly the same. Because this person has a mortgage, does that affect the value of the home? No. That's why we say we borrow against a house to get a mortgage, not borrowing from. If I borrowed from the house, I would have to like go sell all the windows and the doors, and the value of the home would come down because I took from the house. If I'm borrowing against an asset, it doesn't affect the value of that asset. So whose net worth is higher? They're the exact same. Exact same. Now let's say you need access to money. Heaven forbid you need access to money. Who's going to have an easier time getting access to money? Person A or person B? RJ? I know you're busy, but who would have easier access to get money, easier time getting access to the money? Person A or person B? Person B.
Right.
So once we understand that I can go long on debt, and if inflation happens, I want to show you the calculations to use of how inflation is going to help you get ahead. I wanted you to understand first, though, that there is such thing as good debt. If I can go long on fixed debt that ideally is deductible, and last I checked, you can still deduct the mortgage interest. So the IRS is incentivizing you to do this. You have a deductible loan rate that's fixed, that's guaranteed never to change for 30 years. Even at a 7.5% interest rate, That's attractive. Why? Because rates could go to 10. If rates go back down to 3, guess who's going to refinance? I'll just refinance. But I don't want to pay off an asset that's not going to generate cash flow for me. So here's another question that I think is really important. Is a home an asset or a liability? Your personal residence. RJ, what would you think? Is your home an asset or a liability? And I don't think there's a right or wrong here, but I do like talking about this.
I would initially say asset, but I
We
don't know.
think of it as an asset, don't we?
I do, but I'm kind of thinking more of a liability. I would have immediately said asset before, but I kind of don't know, but I'm thinking toward liability.
Yeah. And here's the deal. I don't want to like go long on debt. I want to have a big mortgage and then go have a bunch of consumer debt. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that here's how I define an asset.
Actually, no, I will say liability because unlike a business, it costs you money and you can pay it off. It's great, but and it can accrue and worth. And also if you live, I mean, it can also decrease in value, but it doesn't make you money though,
Yeah,
necessarily.
100%, dude.
Unless it's for sure growing, I guess,
Which
in
is
value.
great, but it doesn't matter if I have a mortgage or not on the house. If it's going to grow in value, it's going to grow in value, which I think is
Yeah.
great. We need, but here's at the end of the day, it costs money to sleep at night.
Yep.
Okay. So I want to own my home. I just want to use other people's money to pay for it. Why? Because it's still technically a liability. If I paid off my house 100% and there's no debt, I still have property taxes. I still have maintenance. And I look at as a definition of an asset as something that pays me. And the definition of a liability is something I pay for. I'm always going to be paying for the house. I want to because I want my family to have a home, but how I pay for it will affect my overall wealth that I'm able to create. So let's get into inflation. Why would I think, how do I get ahead of inflation? Real easy. Short the dollar. What does that mean? It means I'm betting against the value of money. I think my $100 is going to buy much less 20 years from now than what it buys today. So what can I do? I have a mortgage now. Let's say my mortgage payment is $2,000 a month, which would be nice. $2,000 a month. And I know that my rate on my mortgage is guaranteed not to change. So I can print off 360 checks for my 30-year mortgage that all say $2,000. The value of the check is $2,000. And every month I grab another check and I mail it off to the mortgage company. And what's happening to the buying power of each one of those checks? It's going down. What I can buy with the $2,000 10 years from now is much less than what I can buy with it today. So I'm using what's called deflated dollars to pay off an asset that's hopefully going to go up in value. I talk a lot about that. Historically speaking, real estate's done really well with high inflation times. It's a hard asset I can see and I can touch it. People need it. You know, my thesis in all of this is 20 years from now, I think people are going to want to sleep inside. So I think the value of houses are going to go up. And I know that the value of the dollar is going to go down. So I want to short the dollar and buy an asset that's going to go up over time, even at a 7% interest rate. I'm going to switch my screens here. Does that make sense so far, bro?
Mm-hmm.
Right. All right. Let's do some calculations and I'll show you. This is a loan calculator. Let's go to one of these other ones. Let's do this. Let's say the value of my mortgage payment is $2,000. What do you think is a conservative number for inflation? Like, what do you think? Like, how much? What's inflation been over the last 20 years?
I have no clue.
Most people don't. The last few years, it's gone freaking nuts. But the government will tell us 3%, which I think it's much higher than that. But to be conservative, let's say it's 3%. So if I do negative 3% and I would do a 30-year timeline, dude, my $2,000 check is going to feel like $800 by the time I make my last mortgage payment. Does that make sense? I see you staring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to process it. Can you say it one more time?
Yep. The value of my $2,000 is going to buy roughly about the same amount of goods that $800 buys me today.
Oh, based on inflation. Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I said that wrong, actually. The $2,000 is gonna feel like $800
hmm
30 by the time I make my last mortgage payment. So the value has gone down. So the check still says 2 grand, but it's not worth nearly as much as it was 30 years prior. Now, what's happened to real?
The buying power of it based on inflation. I got it makes sense. Yep.
Yep, the buying power has gone to crap. I think inflation's even more than 3%. Like if it's
Yeah.
4%, you're talking 580, like that's $600. That's what it's gonna feel
Yeah.
like.
Well, I always remember my dad said stuff like, "Oh, you could buy a Cadillac for, $8,000 back in my day," that type of thing, like it's different than, now they're, what, $70,000, if not more.
An
So
Escalade's over 100.
yeah, yeah, there you go.
So think about this, dude. We know that's going to happen. So why would I take my valuable dollars today and put it locked up inside of a house that's going to go up in value and never use the cash? I want to use other people's money and pay them back with deflated dollars over time on a fixed low deductible interest rate. And even if it's 7%, I'll pay the 7% because I know the value is going to be going down. And when the rates drop, I'll just refinance. And if the rates go up, I'll be really happy that I locked in the 7. Okay. What's happened to real estate in the last 20 years? Since 2000, on average, real estate has doubled. So if I buy my house today, and whether I pay cash or whether I mortgage it, has nothing to do with the increased value 30 years from now on real estate. So I can use other people's money to buy an asset that's going to go up over time. And then I can constantly borrow against that in the future. So my goal in life is not to be debt free. My goal is to be solvent. I want the ability to pay off a loan if I choose, but I want access to the cash. So the value of my home, I don't want the equity sitting inside my home. I want my equity sitting in an uncorrelated asset. Okay. You could do a savings account, a high yield savings account. You have taxation issues. You have issues with, creditors, it's exposed in lawsuits, but there's ways to have what they call a sinking fund. A sinking fund is something that I would fund rather than pay off the debt. This is kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Rather than paying off the debt, I could take the extra money or the extra payments and put it into an extra account that compounds. And at some point, I'll have enough money in that extra account to pay off the loan. But the difference is you have control over the cash for those 20 or 30 years. So here's what that looks like. Like what? So you ever wonder why lenders give you incentive to go shorter on debt? Like you get a better interest rate on a 15-year mortgage versus a 30. It's because they get repaid faster and then they can lend the money out again. So they'll incentivize that. So let's say I buy a $500,000 home and a 15-year mortgage, the rates right now are about 6.7%. So I'm spending about $4,400 a month. Okay. Now in 15 years, the house is paid for. All my cash flow went into the house. House is paid off, no more debt, and the house value is whatever house value is. Now let's say I take the same $500,000 and I do a 30-year mortgage. It's a higher interest rate. My payment's much less. It's about almost $1,000 less. So I'm paying $3,400 rather than $4,400. So what do I do with the extra money then? Bro, who wants control? Me, I want control over the cash. I don't want to just spend it on lifestyle. The goal is to be solvent at some point. What if I just put the money into boring old life insurance that guaranteed compound growth tax-free? If I put that money inside of a policy, I'm going to reshare a new screen here. Now, these numbers are not guaranteed. This is based on health. Everybody has to qualify. This isn't financial advice. This is just conversation, education, which is intended for conversation. If I were to put like the savings inside of a policy, this is what it looks like. So that's what I would put it in on a policy. Like worst case scenario, I pass away the next day, my wife gets $600,000 tax-free. So I'm taking care of the family. But I keep putting the savings in there. After 20 years, my cash value is about $290,000. You know what I owe in my house 20 years from now? About $290,000. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So what does that mean? In 20 years, I would have enough money inside the cash value that if I chose, I could go write a check and pay off the mortgage. So the question to the consumer is, do you want a 15-year mortgage where all your cash flow is going into the debt equity, you have no access to the cash, and then you're debt free in 15 years, or you're debt free in 20 years and you had access to all this cash for all those years in case something happened? By the way, you also have a really big death benefit for the fam. Isn't that cool?
Mhm.
So my goal isn't debt free. My goal is to have control. I want access to the capital. And this is just one example using a life insurance contract that because I want the guaranteed growth, I want the death benefit, I want the tax free, and I want the liquidity. I have all of these things available inside a policy that by paying off my house, I wouldn't have. So probably going to get some hate for talking about life insurance. I don't care. Leave a comment down below if you have a question. If you want to see what these policies look like for yourself, click the link in the description, set up a call, and we'd be happy to help. Any final thoughts, RJ, before I stop recording?
Yeah, actually, I mean, early on in my after graduating from Cairo school, I had a friend of mine at a wedding mention that like about student loans and all that stuff. And it's like, hey, if you have some equity in your house and you got refinanced and your rate's really low like that, and you've got this big old student loan debt here, it's like pull some money out of your house and pay off that bigger interest loan, right? And take on the bigger guy on there. So I feel like this is kind of the same thing. It's like if you can get more value, why pay more into your mortgage when you can take some out of that and you can get down like the higher interest debt? This is kind of the same thing on the other end. I feel like it's like, well, why pay off that debt if you can make more by putting it into here, make that money, and then you can use that money that you've accrued then to pay that mortgage off later. I feel like it's just a matter of you're just playing with cost benefits, like what makes more or what loses more, and you're just figuring out like what creates the most leverage. I think it's just it's a different way of thinking about it.
You're exactly right. It's called arbitrage. You're playing different interest rates against each other. And look, financial advice is not blanket advice. This is just an example. So people are going to come in with comments about where they are specifically. They need to talk to a financial planner about your specific situation. But the concept, you're exactly right. For the people who want control, there's plenty of options rather than throwing all your money at debt.
Mhm.
In fact, debt is a really good thing when inflation goes crazy because I know that my value of my dollar is going to go down. So I want to buy something that's going to go up in value using a currency that's going to go down in value.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, especially for someone that's really dumb with numbers and was thought that buy term, invest the rest, and that's the way to go, and all our stuff. It when you truly understand like the leverage and you think of it as a tool for cash flow in that way, it's just it makes a ton of sense. You can't look at it just as like, oh, well, I get a whole life policy when it costs way more and you get more coverage for a term. I think they're two completely different tools.
Completely. And like in this
I didn't know the
example,
difference. I used to think it was one versus the other. You chocolate or vanilla,
yeah,
it's not.
exactly. And in this example that I just showed you, I'm just using the money that I'm saving that I otherwise would have put into the house. Like if we do this right, we can find a lot of money that we can throw into a policy and then get it right back out into the world working for us. But the
Mhm.
difference is if it goes into a bank, I have no other benefits. If it goes into a policy, now I have a death benefit taking care of the fam, and I still have growth when I pull the money out. So it's still
Yeah.
compounding as if the money was inside of a policy because I'm borrowing against the policy, just like I would borrow against the house. And then
Yeah,
I'm going to
actually
put the
taking it
cash
out.
to buy cash flowing assets.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part too that I didn't really understand is that the fact that when you're borrowing the money, it's not like you're taking it out and that now your rate of return is on a lesser number. You
No,
still have the same rate of growth, right? Where like, think stock market or whatever it may be, if your percentage gain is on what you have. So if it's gain 10%, lose 10%, you're not at a wash,
right.
right? So, and I didn't really realize that stuff. Same with like HELOC, as you mentioned to me earlier too, right? You're loaning against it. You're still accruing. Your
Yeah,
house is still gaining value. It's not like, oh, I lost $100,000 of value in my house because I took off a HELOC.
yeah.
I was able to leverage it as a tool in order to invest in another liability.
There you go.
So
Entrepreneurial minds, man. We got to be able to think outside the box and not just get in line
for
and
sure.
act
It took
like
me a
sheep.
while to get there. I will say it took me a while to get there, but I'm here. So
I love it, man. RJ, thanks for hanging out with me today, dude.
thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, leave a comment in the link, leave a comment in the part below. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk one-on-one with you, and then click the link, join the community inside of school where you can learn all this stuff for absolutely free. I don't even charge anybody for this. Education is free. And when you're ready to buy a policy, hopefully you can leverage us. So thank you.